Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. Why listen to us, eh? Everything we said about Liam Livingstone and finals day on the previous podcast proved to be a load of codswallop. We're going to chat through the England T20Is after rain saved Australia and Manchester once again, talk about England's new captain, an epic and emotional finals day for Gloucestershire, and Hollywood potentially getting involved in the 100. I'm Rana, and with me today are Ben Gardner and ESPN Cricinfo journalist Matt Roller. Mark Butcher will be joining us later in the show. Let's get straight into it. Matt, is Liam Livingstone the answer, the man to take England out of their current white ball rut?
It's a good question, a big question jumping straight in. I suppose a week ago Liam Livingstone was probably playing for his England future and wasn't in the 50-over squad. Now he's back in the ODI squad and was player of the series in a, to be honest, extremely low-key bilateral T20 series, even by the standard of bilateral T20 series, I think.
Was that just the timing of the year, the lack of context?
I think a bit of everything. I think it was probably a result partly of the squeeze that this summer's had, which has probably been the root cause of a lot of the scheduling moans that people have had, is that because of the fact that the English international summer was effectively squeezed into 1 month fewer than usual because of the T20 World Cup. Everything has been tightened. It meant there were no test players in that series for England, and Australia were a little bit experimental themselves. It's fair to say. I think that team they picked at Cardiff, I think might well be the worst bowling attack Australia have ever picked in a T20 international, with two actual frontline bowlers in Zampa and Sean Ava, and then a load of all-rounders. It's a strange one. It's Livingstone has basically done everything that he could possibly have done in the past week. Then there's also part of me thinking, well, he's probably not actually going to get to bat in this new role at number 4 down the line, because that looks like the perfect spot for Harry Brook in the T20 team. And for all that he played a brilliant match-winning innings in front of a full house in Cardiff, he did also basically smash a load of players over mid-wicket for 6, and took a lot of runs off Marcus Stoinis, for example, through the series. And when he was facing Hazelwood and Zampa, looked a bit more cautious, and that's obviously part of the skill of T20 batting. He's got to win the game in front of him, but it wasn't like a resounding this guy must play every single game. It was like he's had a good series in a low-key series that will probably swiftly be forgotten.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I see what you're coming from, I guess. And there are obviously always two ways of looking at it, and it is more emphatic if he hits every bowler for 6, including Adam Zampa. But then we've seen Liam Livingstone. I feel like we spend a lot of time on this podcast working out like why England fans don't particularly like players who on the face of it have like okay to good records. Like Livingstone's overall T20I record is like averaging 25, 26, striking 150. Like that is decent. Whereas it feels like he gets quite a lot of like, even after that first T20 where he was England's best batter, he got like, it seemed like he getting a reasonable amount of stick. And I think it's actually because he can strike, like sometimes he'll just hit the biggest 6 you've ever seen. And that is kind of, that's his blessing and his curse. Because like, if you can do that, why would you ever not try and do that? Whereas in this innings, like, and you say, I guess if you're being generous to him, you say he really picked his moments really well, which I think he did. Like he took the quicks on in the power play, and then it was the spinners came on. So he's like, right, we'll just knock him around, kind of stay in the game. They then bring back some fast bowlers, think like, right, we've got a breakthrough here. He smashes them again. And then Jacob Bethell's up and running. So he's just given him the strike. And then he takes on Matt Short, who somehow burgles a 5 for right at the end of the game, and then that's the game won. And then I guess also, is he going to get to play in this role? That it's at least England now have the problem of everyone wants to bat in the middle order rather than everyone wants to open. And there's maybe a couple more middle order spots you can kind of find. But he is one of those who has actually, as much as he's been a finisher for England, he does have a better role for England and in domestic cricket at that number 4, number 5 role. And is there a way to fit him, Brook, I guess also Beth, you've got to have in there now, and
Smith,
Duckett at 3 potentially,
and also Curran as well, who I think we're going to come on to, but I think we've all been bagging the Curran at number 4 train, and I mean, I guess we've got some more evidence for that now in that he's had another series lower down and it hasn't worked as well.
I guess what's quite interesting about series like this, when you're against a big team on paper, against lots of big players on paper still. I get your point about the quality of the Australian bowling attack in that last game, but still a lot of big names in there. So if you're watching the game quite casually, like that still looks and feels broadly like a first team Australia 11. But I remember when during the great Darren Milan culture wars years, where Milan basically scored millions of runs in similar series that no one really cared about or remembered. But Milan would score so many runs against big teams. I'm talking about his T20 run to the side, not the ODI, because I think that was slightly different, because in the ODI run, he was actually just England's leading run scorer, full stop, against absolutely everyone. With the T20s, I remember, Ben, you made the point that even when you get runs against a team like South Africa, for example, it is just quite a lot different if you do, and it is clever game management, sure, but it's very different to a World Cup game where South Africa might be rotating their side. So you target a fifth bowler. You can't do that in the World Cup. And I think that is a fair thing to still have over you, particularly in T20 cricket, where you have so much evidence of where a player is at from all the franchise cricket they also play.
And I think that's the important thing with Livingstone at 4 is his record against spin isn't great, and the next T20 World Cup is in India and Sri Lanka, so spin will probably play a big role. Then again, he's also got a really good record batting at number 4 and 5 in the IPL, so it's clearly not that bad against spin either. But it's a tricky thing, and it's I suppose a dilemma that you have where it's so easy to try and extrapolate form that is very bitty. Like, I think we're going to talk about Will Jacks as well, who's obviously got a pretty poor T20 international record at this stage in his career. I think he's batted 17 or 18 times and has got 2 scores above 25. That's poor by anyone's, by any measure. The challenge is that a lot of those have come at sporadic times where he's been in for a game or two. He's played, a couple of games in a given series, in a given role, and then there's a long gap between series, and then he comes in and does it again. It's you're sort of calling it form in T20 internationals, but it's not really form. It's more sort of a set of performances staggered over a long period of time. So it is tricky. I think, clearly Livingstone had an opportunity to be the senior player, to take responsibility. I think he was the second oldest player in that team, and he did it.
Absolutely,
and you can't really argue with it. But then I suppose that the longer term question is that replicable for the next however many England T20Is, and I think it's quite hard to say based on that.
But also, I guess it's I don't want to get too T20 nerdy this early in the podcast, but
we got him on.
Yeah,
so.
that's true. I guess if we're it is interesting thinking about the squad construction needed at times. I think to say go deep in a franchise tournament versus to win a World Cup, which is actually the thing that matters, and that, as you say, we're targeting the 6th bowl or whatever. That is also if you want to get through, say, to the last stage of a franchise tournament, you're probably looking at thinking 10 game tournament, maybe you want 6 or 7 wins. 14 game tournament, you want 8 or 9 wins, and then you'll be through. So you can actually pick players who are going to come off sometimes and not at others, and can be there for matchups, and you can get your wins against these teams. Whereas actually, there is just you think back to that World Cup semi-final and had against India and how good that India team was, but particularly that bowling attack, and there is just no weak link, no place to hide, and it is just such a different thing to pick a team for those two things. The other thing I just say on this series is that it's sort of, in some, it does feel sort of shoved in, and to some degree it doesn't matter too much, but I think it did feel like it mattered at Cardiff, just because they don't get as many international games as other venues, and it is still Australia, and the crowd there they were so into it,
brilliant,
which was great. I mean, when Cam Green stops on the boundary and isn't sure if he's kept it in or not, and it turns out he's pretty clearly not kept it in, and they're chanting "Same old Aussie's always cheating," and then
careful what you say about friend of the podcast Cam Green.
I'm just talking about the crowd atmosphere at Cardiff, which I think did heighten it, and that's one of the things that you can forget as well in international cricket, is that for a lot of the players there, it's their one of not very many chances to play for England, but also for the crowds who are there, especially at some of the less international grounds, for want of a better phrase, that is one of the few times to watch England, and they'll have paid a lot of money, and it will really matter to them as well. And so it's good that it felt like a occasion from that point of view.
Yeah, and I think just on Livingstone, before we move on, and we'll get on to a few players in perhaps a similar place in their international careers to Livingstone, is that his bowling is really effective for England. And over quite a long period of time, to the extent to which England are actually picking their squad slightly differently because of how Livingstone is bowling. They basically have given up on a second choice specialist spinner. You know, Rahan Ahmed had been picked in quite a few squads. Tom Hartley went to the World Cup going back 2 years ago. Liam Dawson was still being picked as a reserve spinner, but they just don't bother now because of the job that Livingstone's doing, and that's even after Moeen Ali has retired. I know that's partly because Bethell's come into the squad, but I don't think we'll see Bethell bowl that much for England. Livingstone, you know, it's not soul-stirring bowling. It's not pretty, but it is really effective, and his ability to be able to bowl against whether it's a right-hander or a left-hander makes quite a big difference, and that is why working out his role with the bat is so important, because I think England are quite a long way away from being in a position where they can move on from his bowling.
Yeah, that's almost definitely fair. I mean, I was just looking through, out of interest, his T20 World Cup record. He's obviously been to 3 now in quite quick succession. With the bat, he's done fine in terms of his record, but in terms of the impact that he's been able to have on games because of the role he's had, it's almost nothing. So he averages 19 strike rate, 142, kind of fine for a 6 or 7. But he's batted 12 times in 20 games and has faced 122 balls, which is about 6 balls per game at T20 World Cups. Meanwhile, he's bowled 38 overs, taken 12 wickets and conceded 7 runs and over, which is, pretty much case in point. He's arguably been, he's obviously a batter who bowls in his estimation, but in terms of raw performance at T20 World Cups, he's arguably been used as a second or third spinner who happens to be able to whack him down the order, which isn't really how we would think about him generally.
I also don't know, is it possibly easier to be a part-time spinner than a part-time seamer these days? Maybe partly because of when you can bowl in innings, possibly. And then also, even if it's not that, England just don't have, they have some exceptional specialist seamers and no one who could do that job in the top 6 as well, which is the other reason why you might go.
Well, is that he can spin it both ways.
Yeah, that as well.
That's huge. That's what he has over literally every other batter who bowls a bit of spin. Is that, Moeen is took 204 wickets for England in Test cricket, but Liam Livingstone was used way more than Moeen Ali in T20 cricket in the last few years. Quickly, Matt, on Jacob Bethell. That was a breathtaking takedown of Adam Zampa. 20 runs in 4 balls against one of the best leg spinners in the world. I thought in this series, looking at the squads, I reckon me and Ben were looking at this a couple of weeks ago. It sort of gives me vibes of like Stokes playing in 2011 against India. You'll sort of forget about this series in years to come until you look at a quick info page like, well, he played that series, did he? And he's been around for that long. He's so talented, and lots of people in English cricket have been excited about him for a long time now, and now we're seeing why. Yeah,
well, Steve James made a similar comparison actually to Johnny Bairstow, who I think hit a similar type of score, like a 40 off 20 at Cardiff in an ODI in maybe 2011 as well. It sort of had that arrival in international cricket vibe to it. Particularly, as you say, the takedown of Zampa was one thing, but I think the nature of the runs he scored during it. Obviously giving him the charge and hitting him for 4 and 6 over mid-wicket wide long on is one thing, but I thought to have done that and then think ahead, concentrate on the next ball, realise he's probably going to try and change the plan and go googly, give yourself room and cut it for 4 through extra cover. I thought it was really sort of stunning presence of mind, maturity, all of the things that you would love to see in a player as young as him. And I suppose he's an interesting one in that a lot of England fans will probably have heard about him for the first time this year and clicked on his profile and seen that he averages 20 with the bat or 25 in all formats and think, what's this all about? He's never even scored a professional 100, but I think he's probably a name that we've all heard for the past 3 or 4 years since sort of under 19 days, since I think he signed pro at Warwickshire in 2021. And the way people enthuse about him from a very small sample of what he's actually of performance shows just how talented he is. And he could have a huge role across formats in the future. He obviously hasn't played a lot of 50 over cricket yet, so it'll be interesting to see what he does in the ODIs coming up. But it was a pretty incredible performance, I thought.
I think was it Lara maybe when he was age 11 said like, you're as good an 11-year-old as I've seen, and then Bell maybe when he's 17 says you're as good as I was at 17 or maybe better. So and Bell was also, he was the one at Warwickshire before Bethell who everyone said the best 16-year-old I've seen was him, and now Bethell's his kind of competition there. So
he's had an outstanding year in domestic cricket, and I really like, I know he's not got 100 yet, I really like that he's a regular presence in that Warwickshire first class team as well. It's getting that red ball grounding. Ben, do England need to be given credit for trusting youth here, even when it might have been easier, given the central contract situation, for example, to stick with someone like Bairstow. Butler was talking in an interview recently where he basically said, having had a few chats with Rob Keane, seeing the direction the test squad is going in, if you're going to target World Cups 2 years down the line, you need to give your young players as much of a chance to impress now as possible. What do you think?
Yeah, I suppose a bit of credit. I mean, it felt inevitable that this would be a Series 4 renewal, and I know that's still like, that was all the focus when they leave out, some big names like Bairstow, Moeen, Milan, but like it just felt so much like the end of that cycle, especially when you're going with a new coach, and especially when, like, talking about the weird status of this series, especially without the full-time coach in there, it does feel like a bit of a free hit for certain young players. Like, you stick him in, and if they go well like Bethell has, then he might well get a run on the T20 side now, and if it doesn't go well, then you haven't lost a lot, because you can bring him back in at some point and no one will remember too much that they didn't get runs in a couple of T20s. I don't think the selectors are picking based on central contract length. I think maybe if we're going to look at it, we're looking at it the other way round, where have they sort of almost like war gamed it out enough, kind of what's the next, if the next 12 months goes like this for X player, what are their prospects going to be for the next 12 months, and is that realistic, and therefore do we give them this length of contract? I think we're going to talk about central contracts more a bit later, but yeah, I mean, it's they've picked young players, and they've learned some stuff about, they've even, it's good that Cox has now got a go, for example, even though like he will come back in later on at some point, and he'll be the better off for having made his debut, even though it's not like he set the world alight. So
we're not going to talk loads about central contracts, but the Guardian reported this week that Ben Stokes is set to sign a 2-year deal, having only signed a 1-year deal last year. And just the detail included in that piece, that Bairstow is still on an $800,000 a year deal, even though it's very plausible he's paid his last game for England. And we're working out before we recorded that is basically 2 entire women's 100 teams for a guy who really might not play for England anymore. 11 months on from the central contract announcements, Matt, you were in India whilst that was going on. A lot of people said that was a distraction. England sort of denied it at the time, but I think with the fullness of time, I think we can agree it was a distraction. That aside, what do you make of what England did? Was bold. It was doing something they hadn't done before. Not many other countries, if anyone, does it. And someone like Bairstow still being on a deal like that is quite eye-catching.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. I think the tricky thing with those central contracts always is that they're a combination of future looking and backward looking, and the backward looking element probably gets underestimated and downplayed to some extent, in that they are still meant to be, to some extent, a reward for performance in the past however long. So a good example of that would be David Milan, who had performed really well for England's white ball teams in the previous year, heading into that contract cycle, which started with a 50 over World Cup. He was always going to play every game for England at that 50 over World Cup, regardless of what happened, as played out. And he was always probably unlikely to play too much after that. But I think, give as a sort of reflection for the fact that he played a lot, and looking ahead to some extent to the fact that he was going to play at that World Cup, which was still part of the cycle, even though very early in it he got a contract. I suppose the other thing is that the contracts are massively varied in valuation. So from what I understand, some of them are slightly more than a sort of good county contract. So like Rayhan Ahmed is on a 2-year deal, and so is Bairstow, but the value of them might be 4 times different. So we do have to be a bit careful at times in saying, this was clearly a great call, this was clearly a terrible call because of who's done what in the time since. I suppose my general thought on it is that I would have, while I understand why the ECB and Rob Key didn't want to do this, I would have liked to see them almost call some players bluff, and call some agents bluff as well, because I still don't think, even with the proliferation of T20 leagues and the boom that we've had in the past couple of years with the ILT20 and the SA20 springing up, I still don't think that it is financially better for almost anyone in English cricket to turn down a central contract to try and maximise their T20 earnings, because I don't think there are enough opportunities and enough lucrative opportunities that you sort of significantly outstrip what your total earnings would be with a central contract. I mean, the ECB almost always say yes to central contracts NOCs. Like, we saw a couple of examples of that in the start of this year where, Curran and Livingstone were both knocked out of the SA20 in sort of end of Jan, and then both went and played, I think, 2 or 3 games in the ILT20 at last minute short-term deals and probably earned pretty well for it for a week in Dubai. So I do think there was a world in which they could have said, if you don't want to sign a contract, that's absolutely fine by us. We'll still consider you for selection, but we don't think you're going to be any better off for it. I still think it is a thing that almost every player in English cricket wants, and you didn't see any of the offers eventually get turned down last year, other than a couple of people opting for a 2-year or 1 year instead of a 2 or a 3. So, but yeah, it will be a really interesting batch this year. Looking ahead to obviously, the bigger challenges, I guess, down the line of away Ashes the following cycle, and then World Cup's coming pretty quickly after that.
Yeah, and also the only guy who's in the 2-year who is now a reasonable amount out of the picture is Bairstow. Really, that is the one that stands out, and he was just in such a particular spot as a cricketer at the point when they handed out the contracts. And you can, with hindsight, you can say like, well, he had just come back from an injury. We hadn't yet seen him hit those heights from 2022, and having seen how it's gone now, it's maybe not that unexpected that he's been a streaky player. If he loses some form, then he's out of the picture because he's getting towards his mid-30s, that sort of thing. But then on the other hand, you had him having been the face of early Bazball, and that for him was only 5 test matches ago because of how he'd come back from the injury. So you can see why they did it from that point of view. So that is the one that is tricky, albeit that's the one you'd look back and be like, that feels a bit more like a mistake. I mean, Adil Rashid might be another one as a 2-year player because he is just of that age, and it's not like he's
Rashid is still literally their first choice.
Yeah, that's true. But you could also see how he might get injuries as well as part of the thing. Like, I could see him being a 1-year player possibly. It's just, I feel like it's always going to be risky giving a guy of that age that length of contract possibly. But
yeah, I think the Bairstow one is the clearest one where it's like they have given him that contract for reward. For exactly what you said, they shouldn't have given him a 2-year contract. But because that's so much money, and I know that the combination of what both of you just said in terms of what are the potential other things that Bairstow is getting at his age. A franchise is not giving him a 3-year contract to be the face of their franchise in the IPL, and £800,000 is an extraordinary amount of money for a game that doesn't have enough money.
I suppose what you could argue is that there were too many 2-year contracts. They could have just offered more 1-year contracts because people would have accepted them still. I think the problem when you had that many 2-year contracts, you would have created an awkward situation with Bairstow if you'd offered him one.
Yeah.
When at that point, let's remember he had there's obviously still a split opinion as to whether he should have kept wicket in the Ashes last summer, but he had a solid Ashes with the bat. He was first choice in the team that went to the ODI World Cup, and he was very likely at that stage and ended up being first choice in the team that went to the T20 World Cup. So if you had a player who was incumbent in all 3 formats and then only gave him 1 year, that would have created some tension, some drama. Whether or not it should have done, whether or not you could handle that situation differently, and therefore maybe there should have just been way more 1-year contracts with options to extend, and
and maybe performance-related clauses that triggered the second year.
But yeah, it's clearly not an ideal situation, is it? But it is also, I think, if you sort of try and take yourself back to August, September last year and the situation that England were in and Bairstow was in, I suppose everything looks inevitable with hindsight, but at that point, did any of us think that Bairstow would have been completely wiped out from all 3 formats a year down the line? I think it was unlikely.
That is fair enough. Anyway, that's it for part 1. In part 2, we'll talk a little bit more about the England-Australia T20Is, and we'll preview the ODIs. We've sort of mentioned a couple of players who didn't have great series. Will Jack still hasn't really got going in T20I cricket. And then Sam Curran, after an outstanding domestic summer, really struggled. Had overs go for 30 and 20 in the 2 games, and again struggled at 6. Curran has now batted 29 times in T20I cricket at numbers 6 or 7. He averages 9.6 at a strike rate of 100.99. That's 29 of the 32 times he's batted in T20I cricket. What next for Curran as an England player? That did feel, as low-key as it was, quite a big deal given the juxtaposition of him having had such a good domestic summer.
Yeah, it did, but then he's batting in the role that I think kind of already knew he couldn't do. So like it's evidence that he can't be a number 6 or 7, but I don't think that should necessarily answer the question of whether he can be a number 4 or 5. And that one position, weird as it sounds, does make a reasonable amount of difference in T20 cricket. But there is also, just as we've kind of discussed, there is such competition, especially now with Bethell announcing himself like that for those top spots. I mean, he has in his favour that he's a left-hander, I suppose, and also have maybe Ben Duckett to come back into the frame from that point of view. But then also the bowling thing is tricky too, because I don't, as much as I think we maybe now know he's not a finisher with the bat in T20 cricket, I don't think we know actually anything about what maybe his best role should be with the ball, because we you kind of see, we've seen him play in Test cricket and swing the red ball and think like, well, can he just be sort of a David Willey type player in 50 over cricket or wipe cricket in general and swing that new ball? That doesn't quite seem to work. We've seen him be a brilliant death bowler in conditions where maybe there's big boundaries where he can kind of bring his cutters and a bit of deception to play, but at other times that hasn't worked. And then you're like, well, can those things be like maybe middle overs wicket taking options and like a Plunkett type thing? But sometimes that doesn't seem to work either. It's kind of that's almost, if he's not going to be in the top 4 or 5, he needs to be a guy who can bowl 4 overs a game, and then you need to know kind of exactly when you can use those overs. And I think England don't know exactly when that is. The other thing as well with finding out some information, like we do now somehow have a massive sample size for Curran really in T20 international terms that he's not that. But it's just so hard to work out if someone's a good finisher in T20 international cricket in particular, because it takes so long to build up that sample. And also because...
Well, I think you just ignore it. It's like you're playing enough T20 cricket that you just look at everything.
Yeah, but it is also like when you...
So not ignore it, but as in it's part of the broader picture.
But when you abstract of like how hard it is to be a finisher, it kind of seems baffling that anyone would ever be that good at it. Like you've got to come in and hit boundaries at the very start of your innings, which is already really hard to do. If you're doing it at the death, you're up against the opposition's best bowlers, and the thing they're explicitly trying to do is to stop you from hitting boundaries. And if you were really, really good at batting, you'd probably in the the top 4 or 5 anyway. So like, it almost, I don't know, can't say just don't have finishers, but actually, do you want to just maximise the top 5? And
what does that mean?
Well, I think maybe just like don't back on your game plan being like let's have a swing and then have Jamie Overton or someone come in and bank that he can take down Boomer in the 18th and 20th or something. I don't know, but
no, it's a fair point, and we were talking earlier about one of the reasons why I like international T20 cricket is because teams are flawed, and you can't go into an auction and look for a particular player to make your side balance, and you therefore have to go about things slightly different. And maybe part of what made India, and I guess to an extent Australia when they're full strength, so strong in the last few years, is that they actually do have relatively balanced sides. So, you talk about England's finisher issue. Australia actually have quite a few. Maxwell, David, Wade, all guys who are pretty adept at coming in and just whacking it from ball one at the death. Yeah, I don't know about Curran. I think it was a really big call for them not to bat him at 4, given the summer he's had. And I think that was almost a call on him.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation, isn't it? I think I think there's probably some level of unanimity in this box right now that we would all have probably batted him at 4. I think that the tricky bit is making that judgment call. Is his T20 international record way worse than his domestic and franchise T20 record because of the fact that he's been used out of position in one and in position in the other? Is it because there's a quality issue and it's a step up and it's easier to score runs off slightly worse bowlers? You can then get into a debate as to whether the bowlers that Curran faced were actually slightly worse or whether they were pretty standard bowlers for a T20 in this series. But more generally, he sometimes does struggle against high pace. He's solid against spin most of the time, but he didn't score particularly freely, I wouldn't say, off Adam Zampa in this series. I don't know. Maybe he's in that sort of, to use the footballing analogy, the sort of Rob Earnshaw, Darren Huckabee, too good for the Championship but not good enough for the Premier League. Maybe he's one of those players, but yeah, it does increasingly feel like one of the great sort of anomalies and curiosities that he was undisputed MVP at a T20 World Cup less than 2 years ago. And yet ever since then there's been this sort of debate as what is this guy? No one knows what he is, and no one really thought, other than that sort of probably 6-week period, that he was a great death bowler either. But he just happened to make it work, and I suppose such is sport.
Well, I've always had a question about Curran in T20 cricket. Why? Because I think I agree with what you just said, but he does also play pretty much every game in every IPL. Is that because of the type of player he is? There is just a shortage of seam bowling all-rounders? Because bringing up his IPL record with the ball, for example, it is just not that great. Every year, bar one, he's gone at tens.
Yeah, I guess there's a balance thing. There's probably also some element in the past 2 years of return on investment, because he's been on an absolutely enormous contract the last 2 years. I think, what was it, 18.5 crore, so nearly best part of £2 million. But I think one of the best players in the league, if not the best. Well, I suppose he's behind Stark and Cummins now, but so yeah, and also as you say, I think even in the era of the impact sub, it's massively useful to have a guy who can bat 4 or 5 and be the third or fourth seamer. And it's that thing that Livingstone has probably suffered from at times in his career as well, where I think the idea of being versatile and adaptable is both a blessing and a curse. It probably gets you more games full stop, but it also means that you play more games where you're out of position or not used in your best role, and then you can reach this point where you've done so much of it where you've sort of forgotten what your best role actually is.
I thought Brydon Carse, Saqib Mahmood and Jofra Archer looked good with the ball.
Yeah. I mean, Brydon Carse, if we're talking about him, he did play... I don't know if it's one of the worst shots in English cricket history, but it was terrible. I mean, to win a game against Australia to level the series, and you just think, I'm going to try and hit a 6 here because that would be really cool, basically, and then hit it up in the air and get caught. But aside from that, yes, he did bowl very well, and obviously heartening to see all 3 of those guys who have been through the ringer for sort of different sorts of reasons, it's just really nice. I don't know.
Yeah, I think with Carse is quite interesting, because I think he's someone, he's on a 2 year, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's someone who I can imagine a lot of people listening to this who haven't seen a lot of him because he's not played that much for England might have wondered why he got a 2 year contract, because he's not as young as the other guys. But I think you saw a glimpse of it here, is that if you compare him to all the players who played Test cricket for England this summer in the bowling attack, Carse is as quick, if not quicker than all of them, and can bat. So I really wouldn't be surprised if he actually steadily plays more international cricket over the next year. I
was really pleasantly surprised, I would say, when I saw the speed gun down at Cardiff. I think the wicket ball was 91.3 miles an hour, something like that, to get ahead in the power play. And Carse has sort of always been someone where I've watched him where I've thought, how quick he looks quick, but sometimes on the gun it shows sort of mid-80s.
Is it county quick, or is it actually quick?
Exactly, yeah. Is it genuine pace? But I think that was indisputably genuine pace. And I suppose, firstly, impressive, just the fact that he's missed so much cricket this summer that he can come back and bowl heat. I don't know, maybe that's the reason why, because he's not had the county grind that some of the other guys have. But yeah, and also I suppose the fact of him being that much older, in his late 20s, and having had this betting ban this summer, which is, he gave a good interview to the Telegraph about it and sort of, I suppose, owned it. It makes it, this is probably his last chance. He's got a window now where if he becomes a 32-year-old fast bowler who's never quite made it for England, then quite quickly you can be discarded. Whereas, right now he's at a point where he could really have a breakthrough in the next couple of years. I mean, he's probably a good chance to debut at some point in that Pakistan tour in the Test series next month, which, by the way, I think starts 3 weeks today, and we still don't know where the tests are, which is an interesting spot. Looking forward to rebooking that flight last minute. But yeah, he was very impressive. I thought Mahmood sort of had, one good game, one less good game. Wasn't so good at Cardiff. But yeah, he's again had a lot of injuries in the last couple of years, and good to see him back in an England shirt, because it doesn't feel that long since he's been playing for England, but having been through consecutive summers of back stress fractures, it's pretty brutal, and I think would have meant a lot to him to get back out there.
Very fun 50 from Jake Fraser McGurk, his first in T20I cricket, and as mentioned earlier, Matt Short, who's someone who's flown under the radar perhaps in recent years. In his late 20s, he's opened up top and did well, and somehow burgled a fifer with those offies at Cardiff. Ben, Harry Brook, England captain, thoughts?
What thoughts do I have? I don't know. I mean, I guess they've gone with him over Phil Salt, who's just in the T20I stuff.
Well, I guess a few people have said it's too soon, particularly in a format where he's yet to really establish himself.
Yeah, but then I don't know who else are you going to go to in that squad, and they, again, seeing this series as a bit of a free hit to see what some young guys can do. That why not? Why can't that lead to some captaincy stuff? I mean, we've kind of seen this in the past. I mean, think about Aidan Markram did it in a series for South Africa against India. Was pretty young into his ODI career at that point, and they were like, oh yeah, you're like, I think maybe Bavoon was out injured possibly. And it's like, you just do it. You're the guy we think can do it in the future. And I guess that it is interesting, almost as much the ODI side as it is just in general for England captaincy options. I mean, if there is any one player who could be an England all-format captain in the future, it's basically him. He's the only one who could do it if they wanted to go that way. But then even if we're just looking at, say, the Test side when Stokes goes, and we've had Pope sort of kind of up and down captaincy audition against Sri Lanka, this is sort of a different sort of thing, but they will still learn from it what they can, I think. And, I guess you get more, like, maybe they haven't picked the absolute best captain for that series, or I don't know, looking at that squad, who I think would be.
I think it's exactly that. You look at that squad. Phil Salt is probably, I guess maybe Duckett is the other one who it could have been. And I was quite surprised to see Phil Salt England captain until I sort of looked at the squad and was like, well, fair enough, there aren't that many realistic alternatives. And I guess it's like you're looking down the line, who could be given the captaincy in 3 years' time when Butler goes, or if not even before then. Brook's mid-20s. He's got some captaincy experience. There's an opportunity to give him more.
Yeah, I like it. I think even though there have been times in Brook's career where he's sort of been criticised as having had the odd brain fade, I think generally just from the way he bats, he seems like quite a clever sort of, he has what people call cricket smarts, I suppose, where he's sort of trying to manipulate fields and trying to plan ahead, trying to work out what the bowler's going to do before he does it, and I suppose has that almost chess player's mentality, which you need as a captain. Yeah, I think it's a good move. I think my only slight fear is that Brook has had quite a full-on year already. He obviously missed the India Test tour on sort of compassionate leave, did the T20 World Cup, played every test, now is captaining some ODIs, then straight to Pakistan. You are asking a lot of a guy. Then again, he's still young. He's on a
3-year contract.
On a long contract. Why not get the most out of him? It's not like he's got a big history of muscle injuries or anything like that. So yeah, I think it's an interesting move. I'll be interested to see where he bats as well.
Yeah, how do you think that top 7 will line up? Because England play so little ODI cricket, and the 2023 World Cup that did not go well was basically the same guys that won it in 2019. So this squad, full of new names, it's quite hard to work out where people were back, especially considering that a lot of these new guys have barely played 50 over cricket professionally.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think almost there might be the odd person who's played one game of Metro Bank this year, but I think no one's played in 2024 out of that squad. Near enough a 50 over game, and some of them played in the Caribbean. But yeah, if you think back to the last sort of, I suppose, England ODI that to some extent mattered at the end of the World Cup, you're looking at Milan, Bairstow, Root, Stokes, and it's all going to be a bit different to that. From what I hear, it sounds like Ben Duckett's likely to open with Phil Salt, which I was a little bit surprised by when I first heard, just because I thought he was a sort of natural Joe Root sort of fill in at number 3, but maybe Duckett is seen as more likely to be part of a first choice England side and could open with Salt. He's probably also someone that compared to Will Jacks, who I guess was the other option, is probably more likely to bat through an innings till the 40th over and get you one of those huge hundreds that sets up a game, or wins you a chase.
And as a partnership, I feel like that's something that could work well, Duckett and Salt.
Yeah, absolutely.
Complement each other, and I think almost the thing that holds his case back a little bit, he's actually got a pretty good ODI record compared to his T20 numbers, is that he's a similar profile of player to Salt.
Yeah, in that he's someone who's going to take on the power play, right? So I can't. Basically, I think the hinge point in this team is, as a lot of the time it is number 7 and what they try and do with the balance. Because in the absence of Moeen Ali, who's obviously now retired from international cricket, you sort of either have, and also the fact there's no seam bowling all rounder, or sort of a seam bowler who could bat in the top 6. So you either have 4 seamers, so 40 overs of seam available to you, which would be Brydon Carse at number 7, which feels a spot high for him, but maybe you want the extra seam cover, especially sort of. I'm staring out of the oval on a beautiful day, but it's been pretty horrible weather recently and probably suited the quicks. Or you go 30 overs of seam, Rashid, and then you get your last 10 between, let's say, Livingstone, Bethell, Jacks, whoever it might be in the top 7. And I think there's merit to both. I think the interesting questions, who bats 3? Could see a case for Brook, could see a case for Smith. Smith's going to keep wicket. So maybe you push him down towards sort of 5 or 6. But it will be interesting. And as you say, none of these guys play any 50 over cricket. So there's every chance that there'll be one game where it goes horribly wrong and they collapse in a heap because they all go too hard. They might also go too slowly at some points and overreact. So yeah, it should be an interesting series. And it's pretty much full strength Australia team as well.
Yeah. Ben, have you got a top 7? Bear in mind, England almost certainly would have announced a team before the time this goes out.
Yeah, that's true. That's the way it always seems to work. Well, yeah. I mean, the Duckett thing it is interesting if he opens. And I think I've convinced myself that I like it. I mean, the thing there is that, well, the traditional thing has been that he's a really good player of spin, so therefore you keep him in the middle order, and also that he's not like, obviously we see him face the new ball in Test cricket and it goes well, but you might think that like. I think people think that the power play, you want to score loads of runs, so you can kind of think, well, we need someone who absolutely whacks it then. But I can actually see Duckett's style, because when he bats in Test cricket, he doesn't leave anything and just like seems to just have quite good natural timing on just quite a lot of like fairly normal shots. Basically, you can just like kind of
he hits good balls for 4. Basically.
Yeah, exactly, and that's kind of getting good balls just like through the infield with like good amount of timing is actually almost more that's the thing that you need to do to be an ODI opener, rather than to be able to whack a 6 every over. If you can hit 3 4s, that's obviously better than that. So so I like that. So Duckett, Salt, and then you've probably going with what, Smith, Brook. You've got, I guess there's a little bit of question over who you have at like 5 then maybe, if it's Cox or Bethell or both. I think I'd like to just see Bethell just keep picking him now that he's kind of informed, see if this guy is the guy. But yeah, so then Bethell, and then
could have Cox at 3 as well.
Yeah, so I've gone Duckett, Salt, Brook, Cox, Smith, Livingstone, Bethell.
Yeah, makes some sense. I think.
Yeah, I'd maybe like to see Bethell higher up though, just because of the, it was like just such an eye-catching knock that I think let's just see what this guy can do when he's like right in form as well. Like just capitalise on it basically.
But I think you're still batting 7 in a 50 over game.
Yeah,
You're going to come in with a lot of time more often than not. I think that's perhaps something that England have got wrong, actually, is viewing the role of a number 7 as just a finisher. It's not really. It's like you actually do have to be a proper batter and react to a game situation, which is actually something I think Bethell has done pretty well so far in his career. And also the same thing goes for Livingstone. If Livingstone is getting this second chance in ODI cricket, it's acknowledging that a number 6, that is such an important position. You look at number 6s in teams that win World Cups, they're genuinely, Butler was England's number 6 when England won the World Cup. Dhoni was number 6 when India won the World Cup. It's high-class players who manage situations well. And if Livingstone is seeking that extra opportunity, that extra responsibility, rather, you get that at 6, you get that at 7 in an ODI side.
Yeah, could have Livingstone at 7 as well. Yeah, Bethell ahead of him potentially. I'd be interested to see how they balance the seam attack as well. It'll obviously rotate a bit through the series, but
5 games.
There's some interesting names in there. I think we'll probably see at some point John Turner will get a debut. It feels like he's
finally.
It feels like he's been around England squads for ages now, even though he's hardly played any pro cricket.
There'll be a lot of people listening to this who don't believe he's real. He just sort of came from nowhere, added to a squad, and barely played cricket since.
Especially when he just get one pro game in the 100, and then starts with 2 full tosses, and so then it's yanked out without bowling ball. It's like, hang on.
I think it's quietly. It could be quite a big series for Reece Topley, because he did not look up to scratch, I didn't think, in the T20s. He's not had a great year generally in T20 cricket. Had a pretty quiet IPL. Sort of did okay for England at the T20 World Cup, but more sort of kept it tight rather than new ball wickets. And I was thinking, actually, I think we'll come on to Gloucester winning on T20 Finals day, but given how sort of stellar a season David Payne had, I was thinking there's probably a case at the moment that David Payne is a better fit in that T20 role, at least, than Reece Topley. And they're not that, they're only so different in age. I wouldn't be Yeah, I think, and Topley's also heading into the final couple of weeks of his contract. I don't know whether he's already got a new deal on the table at this stage, but it could be a big series for him. His pace is a bit down. It didn't look that threatening, I didn't think, against Australia.
Well, that's it for part 2. In part 3, we'll hear from Mark Butcher. Butch, Gloucestershire winners of finals day for the first time ever. An emotional day for a county who haven't had it easy for a whole multitude of reasons in recent times. They were just outstanding on the day.
Yeah, they sure were. A stunning sort of performance from their bowlers, really, wasn't it? Matt Taylor and David Payne were exceptional in conditions that, their captain Jack Taylor described as being almost sort of perfect for them, sort of slowish pitches with a bit of grip. And Surrey had their chance in that first semi-final, but blew it. Not having a sort of specialist one-day spin bowler in their side sort of cost them, as well as having half their bowling attack sort of removed from quarter-final to final through call-ups. And then you thought, well, I mean, it's Somerset's for the taking, right? No team has ever won it back-to-back times. But Gloucestershire slammed the door shut on them in no uncertain terms, with a quite clinical display. It was a fabulous display from them in the final, really, against a very, very good side. And of course, Sussex just sort of didn't turn up, unfortunately for them. They didn't give a very good account of themselves at all, which was a real shame because they played well throughout the group stages. So, I mean, it wasn't a vintage finals day by any means. And by that, I don't mean because Gloucester won it, as somebody pointed out to me on social media. I just meant, the games themselves. Actually, there was very little jeopardy in them, barring that first semi-final where, Somerset recovered from 3 for 7 or 7 for 3. But then they strolled it anyway, and then the second game was a stroll, and the final was a stroll. And so on that score, it wasn't, there wasn't a massive amount of excitement in it. But my goodness, Gloucestershire, who went into it sort of as fourth favourites, thoroughly deserved their win, and I couldn't be happier for them or for Sid Lawrence, the president, who obviously was there to watch it all unfold.
From a player's point of view, it must be quite a weird day to navigate. The days stayed identical, I think, since the first year in 2003. It must be particularly weird if you're in that first semi-final. And I was looking, because I thought it must be an advantage to playing that second one. And I looked, the last 4 winners have come from the second semi-final. It just from how early your start is that day. If you're playing the first game, the number of hours between when you're starting at 11 in the morning to when you finish the final is quite a lot and quite difficult to navigate. It must not be exactly clear what to do during the second semi-final as well. And also the conditions are likely to change more from the first game to the third game as opposed to second to third, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, there are all of those things. I mean, it's just, I don't know. It's never been my favourite way of deciding what is a pretty tough competition to sort of play all of those group matches, win a quarter final, and then go to the thing. I don't think from a playing point of view it's ever been satisfactory. But obviously people love it. I mean, look, the other thing about it that was interesting to me was that in all of the quarterfinals, the atmosphere in the grounds was much more sort of high octane than it was at finals day. And of course, the reason for that is the 2 sets of supporters there for the quarterfinals are there for that game, for those teams, and for those teams only. With finals day, you have a lot of people who are there for the day out and not supporting any of the 4 sides. They bought tickets ages ago. They wanted, to dress up like a wizard or something and have a great day on the beers with their friends. And so you end up in this weird situation where, yes, there were pockets of Somerset fans and yes, there were pockets of Gloucestershire fans. But at no point did you ever feel as though the sort of like the crowd was really involved in it. And I felt that for the last however many years that I've done it. I understand, it's kind of this big sort of centerpiece and it lasts for the whole day and all this kind of stuff. But surely after 21 years. Yeah, there's a better way of doing it, because as I said, the quarterfinal nights for me are the best nights of the entire comp, and and then finals day becomes it's about the mascot race, and if you're lucky, people remember who won it. Thankfully, they will this time because it's a first-time winner.
Yeah, I sort of disagree in that I think it's quite an infectious viewing experience off the TV in a similar way that people who turn up to the darts, right, they're not Michael Van Gogh in ultras. They will just support and make noise at whoever's in front of them. And, I think the darts comparison is quite interesting because if you've got a Venn diagram of people who go to finals day and people who apply for tickets to the darts, it might just be a circle. But I think it is a very good TV watching experience. And I wonder, we had a few emails in from people who haven't previously watched that much of the Blast but got into the knockouts this year. And I do wonder if English cricket almost doesn't make more of a deal of the knockouts of the Blast more generally. They had a record crowd across all 4 quarterfinals this year. The crowd at finals day is always good, and I do think
which kind of backs up my point. But anyway,
yeah, no, but I think more generally, I think mix it all together. I think that's a really good product, and I think that the passion that the players and fans alike have is quite infectious, even just off the TV. What do you make of the scheduling of it, where you just have the quarterfinals, 6 weeks after the group stage finishes, and then 2 weeks after the quarterfinals, you have finals day, and it feels like you're rewarded for excellent performance in the group stages with a knockout competition, but the knockout competition is just almost like a different tournament to what happens before it because of player availability, etc.
Yeah, I mean, it's so difficult to navigate, isn't it? I mean, obviously you need enough time between the group stages, the knockout in the quarterfinal, and then the final in order to kind of for everybody to get their stuff together to organise buying tickets and getting travel arrangements and all that sort of stuff organised. Although, as I've said, for finals day, a lot of people, regardless of who's going to be in the final, will buy their tickets in advance anyway. The whole thing would carry that little bit more momentum, I suppose, if the gaps weren't quite so large and it wasn't so deep into September. But then, we're about to embark upon a 5-match ODI series between England and Australia that hasn't started yet and finishes on the 29th. So, the summer is there to be used up to its fullest or right to its extent. But look, I still think that the Blast, or at least the sort of like particularly the quarterfinals of the Blast, have sort of shown that there's still a massive passion for county knockout cricket. Obviously, there is no sort of B&H or the NatWest or whatever the other tournaments were back in the day, and so it all gets crystallised, or at least the attention all gets crystallised into the Blast being the kind of like the last standing big trophy to win. And on that score, you have to take your hat off and sort of say that it's still mighty relevant. Now, lots of people have their views on what's the best way of doing it, but it's still very, very relevant, and people very much enjoy it. And at the end of it all, what's sport for if it's not for people to enjoy? So I'm sure next year we might be having sort of double headers with the women. How then you sort of like navigate finals day? You'd probably then have to split it into semi-finals on a day and 2 finals on another. The whole thing is likely to change again. I'm not entirely sure how that's going to work out yet. But obviously there are talks happening about what the TV scheduling might be like and how we might be sort of presenting men and women's sort of double headers in T20 cricket. So all remains to be seen. It'll all change again, and we'll all have a big row about it again.
Finals day is the one constant. It's the one constant in English cricket. Is finals day is exactly the same. It always has been.
Yeah, for the last 20 odd years. Yeah, absolutely.
Moving on, you have a new album out in 10 days' time. Always,
yes,
somewhere. So bear in mind when you're doing promo for this album elsewhere, you're probably speaking to someone who knows something about music. My music knowledge is relatively limited, so. Forgive me in advance. I guess first question, cricket or music? You can have one thing for the rest of your life. What are you choosing?
Oh, come on. That's a disgraceful question. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll answer it, but not quite in the way that you want. If it was something that I was being forced to play, then it would be music, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. something you can do from your rocking chair when you're 80, as opposed to trying to go out and bat when you're 50 odd. No thanks.
Obviously, you've loved music all your life. When did you get into writing?
Probably about 15 or 16. I started sort of writing songs. So this one would be the third album, third LP, and as you get older, you get better at these things, and so I'm really proud of the songs. Nearly all of them. Well, in fact, 12 songs on the album. 9 of them are solely written by myself, and the other 3 are co-writes. And that side of it, I just love. It's endlessly fascinating. And there's all sorts of subject matter on there, almost some autobiographical stuff that I haven't really sort of ventured into before, as well as the usual having a pop at Boris and Trump and stuff like that, which I love doing. It's one of my favourite things to do. What
do you do when you sit down and you're starting to write an album? Like, what are you trying to achieve at the beginning of the songwriting process?
I don't know. So just something that sort of satisfies me really as being a good job. When I sort of began the process, there was one song maybe left over from the sessions for the previous album now playing. So I already had a sort of like a little bit of a head start. But then, when the writing started for all of this stuff, it was sort of COVID lockdown, lots and lots of time being stuck in quarantines in places and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of had time to really concentrate on without interruption on being able to write the best song that I could possibly come up with. And so that there's never any sort of like end point or an idea where you go, well, this is what I'm trying to say, but kind of quite often the things would almost appear whole in terms of an idea. And then it's a question of sort of slotting them into melodies and and coming up with interesting hooks and stuff. And so and that's basically it. So myself and my producer Pete Twyman have spent a long time, 2.5 years there was no time limit, sort of bouncing ideas and files and things backwards and forwards until we came up with the end result. With the help of some very, very fine players.
I always think that people in your position who've had careers in the spotlight and then are on TV all the time in their post-playing careers have quite interesting relationships with the public, in that people probably think they know you really well, but actually 99% of the time you're talking about a game, right? Do you think people listening to this album will get a much better sense of like who you are as a guy?
Yeah, possibly, yeah. I mean, again, not intentionally, but I was able to come from a much more sort of personal space in a lot of this writing than I had done previously. Just simply because I think I was able to articulate myself a little bit better in terms of how I felt about things, or how I saw myself. Really, I guess that's more to the point. You become more self-aware the older you get. And so on that score, yes, there's possibly. I mean, people who know me will kind of go, okay, yeah, that is you. And people who don't will go, well, he's still a twat. He's still a twat. He's always having a go at Somerset or whatever it might be. It's just that you're not in any control of when you put these things out.
Do you find it easier to write the older you get? Writing about yourself, being more honest about yourself, etc.
Yeah, definitely. I suppose there are less. Ashamed is not quite the right word, but there are less sort of things that you can't justify is not the right word, but you have better explanations for why you may have done certain things, or how things have turned out, and how you've worked to try and put them right, or to make things better. And as you get older, you're much more at peace with sort of some of the decisions you made in your life. So yeah.
Cool. Well, Always Somewhere is out on the 27th of September. We'll leave details for that in the description as well as for the album launch event, which is at the Kia Oval next week. Awesome. Cheers for your time, Butch. Catch you next time.
No problem. Great stuff.
Beat the ballot and secure a premium experience at the England-India Test Series in 2025 with seats unique, a game changer for fans looking to enjoy the ultimate match day. Seat Unique has premium tickets and hospitality packages offering official access for all days at Headingley, Edgbaston, Lords, Emirates Old Trafford and the Kia Oval. You'll elevate your experience from the best seats in the house and enjoy luxury perks such as complimentary food, drinks, afternoon tea and guest speakers from the world of cricket included in your ticket. Buy yours online now at seatunique.com. An amazing day for Gloucestershire, Ben, on Saturday. They won the Blast for the first time in their history, their first trophy in 9 years in front of a raucous Edgbaston. Amazing story for lots of reasons, Ben. They very nearly didn't get out of their group for one.
Yeah, I mean, so they get out of the group on net run rate and then put together basically the most dominant possible knockout performance, especially on finals day. So on finals day, they lost 4 wickets across 2 games, which is the fewest any team's ever lost on finals day. Also, they're only the second team to take all 20 wickets on finals day and had the best economy rate for a team on finals day. So like an astonishing, like, well, not turnaround. I mean, they did get through the group, but they squeezed through the group and then just blew everyone away. And yeah, like loads of stories, but actually in a way, the best ones were the ones off the field, I think. I mean, you know, there's some really lovely pictures with Sid Lawrence, the club president, who's got motor neurons. He's obviously a club legend, played for England, and just have hit him and James Bracey with the trophy. That's just really nice. And a great interview with him in the Telegraph where he talks about the impact of the disease. It's a brilliant anecdote with Viv Richards, which I almost don't want to spoil. Because
yeah,
it's so
I reckon don't spoil it. It's so good.
Just go and read it as he says it. So that was lovely. And then also for Mark Elaine, who and actually be interesting to get Matt's thoughts on this, because I know you've done some coverage on English cricket coaching recruitment processes, but he was at the heart of the great Gloucestershire side of the turn of the century, where he was a player, a captain, and then by the end a captain and coach, as they basically won every white ball trophy there was to win. Then switches to just being a coach, even manages to get them to their first, before this weekend, their only T20 Cup final appearance, and then leaves that job and then just doesn't not even get another job, doesn't get an interview for the next 13 years, despite having been one of the few like people who's been good at captaining, one of the few Englishmen who's been good at captaining in white ball cricket basically, and then done that as a coach, and then finally kind of in 2020 gets sort of back into it a bit. He does a bit with England sort of as a sort of fill-in coach and some overseas tours, then gets to go with Glamorgan and Welsh Fives, Glamorgan's white ball coach last year, and then comes back into Gloucestershire, and then instantly they get white ball success again. I think he's talked about in the past, about the frustration with getting it, and obviously I know Taha did an interview with him for WCM a little while ago where he asks him directly, like, do you think it is a race thing? And he says, look, I don't know what is in people's heads when they're not turning me down for jobs, but like I know my record and I know what I've done as a player and as a coach, and it is frustrating when you look out and see you're just not getting the opportunities that you kind of feel deserve, and now he's getting them, and that's great.
Yeah, I think it's a real damning indictment of county cricket for that sort of 10-15 year period, really, where he was going for jobs unsuccessfully for however long, and sort of not even getting the chance to do an interview. And it's an awkward one at the moment. I think clearly Rob Key and the ECB are keen to fast track certain coaches and have clearly sort of lost some element of faith in, they think all the coaching badges are slightly overrated and they think hands-on experience is more important. And I completely get where they're coming from with that. I suppose the flip side is that it is important still to have some kind of formal process because of exactly examples like Elaine's, because once you've been out of the game for a little while for whatever reason, it can be very hard to get back in. And if you don't even have the opportunity to interview, then you have no idea what the feedback is. So that's why, you mentioned I covered in just before the start of the 100. I mentioned the fact that, and sort of did a story on the fact that Flintoff wasn't interviewed to become Northern Superchargers coach. They got rid of James Foster. They heard that Flintoff was available and they made him their coach. They didn't follow the Rooney Rule. There was no application process. It was just, you're our guy. And in some ways, maybe that's okay, because Flintoff, legend of English cricket, get him back in. My take would be, even if you wanted him and made him your number one target, you should advertise the job, have some kind of formal process, and give other people the opportunity to impress you at least. And that's what the ECB then did when they made him England Lions head coach, because they advertised that role publicly. That was on their sort of their careers portal for however long it was, and he came out of that process top. And I think that's a much better way of doing job recruitment personally, than sort of the smoke and mirrors that has existed for a long time. And I think that is generally changing, but yeah, it's a tricky thing to get right.
I think there are a lack of transparency in two different ways, and one of them for seeing someone like Flintoff being fast tracked, I don't have a problem with, but there are some people who have actually coached a fair bit in English cricket who seem to get jobs and get promotions, their careers progress, and you see someone like Elaine and you compare it to other people who keep getting jobs, and you're like, okay, there is no, I can't see the reason. Whereas at least with a case like Flintoff, sure, it might not follow due process necessarily, but you can see why you want one of England's greatest ever players to be in a dressing room. And I think there are two different things. Yeah. But going back onto finals day, two leading lights in the Gloucestershire campaign were Matt Taylor, brother of skipper Jack, who neither bowled or batted on finals day actually, but Matt took 29 wickets in the competition with his left arm seam and took a 3 for in the final. And as Matt mentioned earlier, David Payne, a one-time England player on a white ball only contract at Gloucestershire, equalled Alfonso Thomas's all-time blast record for the most wickets in a season with 33, and that is also Alfonso Thomas's second mention on the pod in as many weeks.
Rightly so.
We had a really interesting email in from Ariane about something more broadly to do with the general scheduling of the English summer. But there's a couple of paragraphs that were on the 100 versus the Blast, which is quite interesting because he's got quite an interesting perspective on it. And he said, I've been following cricket in detail for the last 5 years or so, but my interest definitely grew with the introduction of the 100 3 years ago. I was immediately a fan, and as I did not have an allegiance to a county, I found it to be a genuinely gripping competition to follow. I always found the noise from traditional fans too odd and frankly off-putting, as they so vehemently opposed the exact competition that reignited my interest in the game. This might be an unpopular thing to say, but I just didn't enjoy the Blast at all. It felt convoluted, lacked quality players, and seemed a bit like an afterthought. However, over the last 2 weeks, I've watched all 4 quarterfinals and have just finished watching Finals Day, and I must admit, I was quite surprised at just how gripping I found it. The crowds genuinely seemed to care, as did the players, and the quality was as good as anything you would see in the 100. Ben, should the ECB do more with the Blast, and particularly the knockout stage? I think it's one of the best products that English cricket has, and I think there's something, we've touched on it before, there's something quite infectious when there's crowds who are clearly really, really into it, and that's what you get in the knockout stages of the Blast, because it does feel like it just sort of, it's this thing that's existed for 21 years. It's sort of in the background. Finals Day still happens. It still pretty much sells out every year without too much fanfare around it, because there is this really loyal following of it that are always engaged, but almost from like a TV point of view. Get it on the BBC, something like that. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think it'd be great, and it it is, Finals Day is just such a good event. I mean, it's funny how different I think they are almost as viewing experiences. Finals Day and quarterfinals week. Like I actually, if we're getting quite into this, I don't know, but I think I prefer quarterfinals week because one, I think Finals Day, it's great, but it is kind of exhausting. 3 games back to back, like basically 10 hours of cricket. Like that is a lot, even for us. And you also, it is more of a carnival and less kind of a I don't know, of a coliseum, a cauldron, I guess, like where you have the fans. Like you've got fans there from all 4 teams. You also got people there who are just getting tickets because it's Finals Day, and that's. I've
got a mate who goes with his mates every year. None of them like cricket.
Yeah.
And their highlight of the day is the mascot derby.
Yeah, which
is my highlight of the day too.
And I watched that, and that was actually the closest game on Finals Day this year was Lanky out in the lead and then pulling a hamstring.
The dragon wearing trainers. I'm not having that.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I mean.
You've got to wear the clown feet.
And it's always Middlesex in last place, so yeah, it has some integrity. But yeah, I mean, also there's the issue with the scheduling of it, and I think I wrote a thing for the cricket paper about this, about like how it's like I call it like the stuffed suitcase problem, where you're trying to shove everything into this suitcase, and you kind of and then you get to your holiday and you open it up and you realise that like nothing's where it should be, and it's like really hard to find anything. And everyone agrees you want less stuff in there, but no one can agree on what that stuff should be. And then you get asked to stuff a load of crisps in there, but so I think, you know, I probably ideally you would have quarterfinals week quite soon after the end of the group stages, which you would then follow on quite soon after with finals day. That there is a bit of a thing there where you want to make sure you sell tickets for these things. So if you're if you're not sure you're going to be in the quarterfinals until, you know, the last day of the group stage, and then all of a sudden your quarterfinal is 3 days later, you might find that you're struggling to pack the ground out, versus if you have like a bit of a lead in. So I can see we want a bit of a gap there. But then if you have that, all of a sudden you can't really have county championship in the height of the summer, because that's what that would end up taking over, I think, or you'd have to, you know, shuffle around in some different way. So it is a really tricky thing to do, just with the amount of cricket there is and where people want certain bits of cricket, and this is the compromise they've reached. But it isn't ideal, especially when you look at, you know, so it's like sort of the slightly muted overseas presence, for example, like some players who can play quite a big part in the group stages who then just go off and play the CPL or whatever else, which means that you don't get those guys. And yeah, I think free to air for the like, especially like finals day on free to air would be undoubtedly a better TV product than some of the England games that get put on there.
I completely agree.
And you can very easily explain what this thing is.
Even if it was just the final as well. I think the scheduling is such a, I don't know, you don't want to bore on about scheduling, but it's such a pain, because there's the two competing views on whether to do quarterfinals straight after, and I think it was basically left up to the counties for next year. Do you want to do quarterfinals and finals day straight after the group stage, or do you want to have the gap, have the 100 in that midsummer window, and then do it in September? They've done it, and they've chosen the second one. And I don't know, it was good and bad this year. You had the best ever quarterfinal attendances. You know, complete sellouts at Wantage Road and Hove, which was great. Full here, near enough, or 20 odd thousand here.
Yeah, it was 20,000.
Even though it was September.
Even though here it's in the same week as a test match, on a Tuesday.
And then they had a decent crowd at Edgbaston, even though that was, again, you know, they've had white ball games all through the summer, and they obviously had finals day coming up. So that was a good thing. But then you had, I think Dan Hughes and Bancroft were the two overseas at finals day, out of a possible 8. So that's not great. And then obviously you had the clash with the one day, the T20s, which is, I was just checking this, it's exactly the same thing next year. And it's between, there's a T20 international against South Africa in Manchester on the 12th. Finals day is on September the 13th at Edgbaston, and on September the 14th there's a T20 international in the afternoon at Trent Bridge. So you're probably not going to get any of the T20 players released unless...
Even though they were all there.
They
were all at Edgbaston from the England series. Like, you know, they're all just sitting there, you know, Jamie Overton there sitting in the stands, having like not really done loads in the T20 series to begin with, watching his brother Craig bowl for Somerset against Surrey, who could have been playing for. And also you could look at the forecast and see that the Old Trafford game was probably going to be a washout.
It's such a pain, isn't it? And I think, there's no right answer to it. But I suppose from the cricketing side of things, I thought it was notable, actually, and I don't think it's been mentioned that much, that Gloucester's team is almost exclusively, I think Payne is the only exception. I think Payne is the only one in that team who played a 100 game this year. I think Matt Taylor had a contract and didn't end up playing much at London Spirit. But that feels like it says something about where the Blast is at the moment, where actually a lot of the time it is more about having good players who can play across formats, who have probably gelled in that 50 over cup in a way that a lot of the other teams haven't, because players are coming and going and they're suddenly back at the end of the season, having been playing maybe a slightly different role, having been maybe playing with slightly different teammates in the 100.
Well, it's basically about get to the knockouts.
Absolutely.
And then the availability is so different for some of these counties that, you know, it's almost a new competition at that point.
I mean, Surrey used 24 players this year? It's crazy. But...
Somerset's dream of a domestic treble is over after their defeat in the final. I thought the semi-final against Surrey was great. Lewis Gregory getting Ollie Pope and Jamie Smith out in consecutive deliveries. Then Rue on Blast debut rescuing Somerset from 7 for 3 with Sean Dixon, both of whom scored 50s. I thought Rue was really impressive. Ben, you've taken issue with people referring to Somerset's quest for a domestic treble.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a huge issue. I just don't really know what it means. I guess it's probably just taken from football, where if you win the the Carling Cup, whatever it's called these days, and the FA Cup and the Premier League. That's domestic, and you can win some. If this is people quietly saying we should bring back the Champions League T20, then I'm all for it.
Maybe it's a legacy of the Champions League. Maybe someone said, well, they're not actually winning the treble, they're winning the domestic treble because they've got knocked out in the group stage in the CLT20.
Your point being that Somerset haven't squandered a continental.
Yeah, they haven't sort of played the kids in the Europa Conference League and then
got knocked out by Rotterdam CC.
Finally, Matt, you wrote a story this morning about potential Hollywood involvement in 100.
Yeah,
it's just a great sentence.
Yeah, I had a chat with the chief exec Dan at Glamorgan on Friday before the T20 International, Dan Cherry. There's obviously been a few murmurings about this through the year, but yeah, he confirmed that there has been some contact between Glamorgan and Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney, which feels like something that would have been hard to envisage 5 years ago, maybe slightly more given the obvious link with Wrexham. My instinct is that they're not the favourites and that it's still relatively unlikely that they'll end up being the partner with Glamorgan, who co-own Welsh Fire. I think they're more likely to end up with potential. I know there's been some interest from Multan Sultans, the PSL team. I think there's, throughout the summer, a lot of people have spoken to a lot of other people, and the past sort of week or so is when people are actually getting the detail for the first time from Rain and weighing up whether they want to bid, how much they want to bid, all this stuff. But yeah, it is a tantalising prospect, really. I think I do doubt that it will actually get over the line, but yeah, the word was that it is definitely a possibility, and as long as that's the case, I think it's quite exciting for. I don't know. I suppose a lot of people's fears with the 100 is that the wrong sort of people are going to end up buying the teams, but I think few people could have a real objection to two guys who have got such a good track record now with a small football club taking them up.
I've always thought that one of the things that would give English domestic cricket the most exposure, although not necessarily for positive reasons, would be a documentary, like a proper no holds bars, this is what it's really like, behind the scenes documentary following a county across the season. Obviously it would be much more Sunderland till I die than All or Nothing, but I think that would be so good, actually showing just how mental the schedule is. And just how crazy the life of a county cricketer is. Like Cam Green on last week's show, he just clearly just couldn't believe that English cricket lets the schedule happen. It's like I've heard stories, mate, and it's like clearly doesn't want to be involved.
It also just shines a new light on just how rubbish Welsh Fire have been. Like having not made the playoffs in any of the 4 seasons so far, and having been truly terrible for some of those years. But it's all just been a ploy to get the Hollywood guys in, because now you can't do a rags to riches tale if you don't have the rags.
Yeah, that was why the women's team lost the final this year. They got told we can't get the great bit out the way before the doco comes in. Yeah, welcome to Welsh Fire, available Disney Plus. It'll be good.
Excellent stuff. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Matt. Cheers, Ben. Cheers, listeners. We'll be back next week.